They learn the hearts and minds of their customers, so that when they go back to headquarters, they start talking about what the trends they're seeing, what the needs are for small packets of shampoo. When they go through and have these discussions back home, they have firsthand information about what's going on in their customers. And then they translate that into new products, new services, new offerings. And that's the way that HUL connects, accesses information that helps them to bridge the gap between their customers and their employees. And it's really brilliant. Again, in that process, their management trainees acquire information, they bring them back home and they analyze it, they prioritize, interpret, debate, and share, and then they apply that to future product offerings. Just is very interesting. So the point is, but they wouldn't understand what they're doing in its intellectual richness unless they frame that in the context of information. How are we doing time-wise? Okay, let me give you another example. Now, there's lots of examples. To import, how do you make sure that critical information is imported and then applied quickly and accurately to meet customer needs? Now, you know, all of you, if you haven't gone to Disney, you've all studied Disney, and you know, as a company that knows how to manage its culture, it's as good as any company in the world. Now, let me give you an example of how they leverage information. One of the things they have now is they have these wristbands. They call them magic bands. And when you go into a Disney theme park, and they have these wristbands, and you can embed as much or as little information as you want in those magic bands. Your credit card information, your room number, if it's a family reunion that brings you to the park. So you have a bunch of information. So when you go back to your room, by the way, you just swipe that up against your room lock, and it opens the door. If you want to buy a candy, no, you don't buy candy. You want to buy a small doll for your daughter, then your credit card information can be embedded. Or if you don't want it to be embedded there, it won't be embedded. But if you want that embedded, then you go up and swipe that, and you pay for the kind of functions as a credit card. But the other thing that's interesting is just before the pandemic, we went with my daughter, my granddaughter to Disney, and one of the things my granddaughter Rose is her name, that really wanted to see Elsa, you know, from Frozen, and she just wanted to see Elsa. Oh, she was so excited, and it was her birthday, and embedded on her wristband was was her birthday, so that she would get kind of special treatment. So we waited in line for a long time to finally be able to see Elsa. Now, what we didn't know, but was the case, as now Rose is next in line to see Elsa, and she gets within 10 feet of Elsa. In Elsa's ear, there's a hearing device that connects to the magic band. And as Rose approaches Elsa, the magic band communicates to Elsa, this is Rose Brockbank's 7th birthday. She's is her birthday today. She's 7 years old. Oh, so Elsa's got it. So she holds out her arms to Rose and says, and holds out her arms, says, Rosie, happy birthday. How does it feel to be 7 years old? And Rose looks at her and rushes into her arms and says, I'm the happiest little girl on the planet. And then she looks back at me and says, what? Oh, I love you, Grandpa. And Grandpa takes out his wallet and says, how much did that cost me? And the point is that by leveraging that information, they convey that information instantaneously from their customers to their employees that create that wow experience. And again, Disney does that over and over again in virtually all of their practices. How do you connect customer information to the employee experience so that the employees create a wow experience for their customers. Okay. And that's one way that, again, Disney makes sure that there's this connection between acquiring, analyzing, and applying information. Okay, so let's go to the next step, which is debate and prioritize. BlackRock, at least as of 6 months ago, had more information, had more control over investments, several $trillion, $7.5 trillion in investments than any company in the world. So information is absolutely critical for them to make huge blocks of investments around the world. So what role might HR play in helping to debate and prioritize information that then can be a competitive advantage for BlackRock? Well, it turns out twice a year, BlackRock brings together what they call the BlackRock Institute, BRI, the BlackRock Investment Institute, actually, and BRI, and in that these are 2-day seminars where they bring in the leading speakers from the investment community around the world. They bring in their senior leadership. Larry Fink, here's the CEO and chairman, and also people that are on the forefront of social, political, or economic trends. And they bring them together. People have to do homework. There's about 100 or so odd people are invited to each one of these sessions. And they listen to these speakers. They had to have done some homework ahead of time to prepare for these speakers. But then over the next 2 days, these 100 people debate, argue, filter, expand, look at the implications for what they've heard and what it means for BlackRock's future investments and for their own investments. Okay, that makes sense. And there's huge debate. If you don't contribute, if you sit back like a bump on a log and don't contribute, you'll never be invited again. On the other hand, if you try to hog all the time and don't have the ability to facilitate others to contribute, then you also won't be invited. So you have to have the skills, these subtle leadership skills, to both assert your own opinions without being overbearing, but to also help others to provide their information. So at the end of 2 days, you've had this rich exchange of information, its analytics, and what its application might be. What's the background of the people that run the BlackRock Institute? Now, it should come home to you folks. They're all out of training and development. And that's the fun, and that happens twice a year, and that provides the fundamental intellectual framework that helps to guide BlackRock's fabulous success in its industry. Hadn't thought about that. Next, it might be a little bit more intuitive, is relevant sharing. And the question there is, how do you make the information whole greater than the sum of the parts? In most companies, the information whole is equal to the sum of the parts, but that's not competitive advantage. The question is, how do you make the information whole greater than the sum of the parts? By sharing. And that's part of the analytical process. Let me give you a very quick example. Again, we got more examples from Wyeth and IBM, but let me give you an example from Goldman Sachs. A few years ago, this would have been about 3 years ago, I had the opportunity of visiting with a pretty senior person from Goldman Sachs. It's really, I mean, he's really he asked me not to use his name, but he's a pretty senior guy. And 20 some odd years ago, when he was a junior analyst, he made a brilliant decision. He looked at some data, he analyzed it, and made an investment recommendation that made Goldman a ton of money. At that time, Goldman supervisors had the ability to give spot bonuses, and they could reward people for doing something really brilliant right on the spot. So this man's boss called him into the office and said, Boy, that was really amazing. That was really terrific. You really did a terrific job. And that made the company a lot of money. Thank you. Here's your bonus check, $10,000. Oh, so that's terrific. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. And they talked for a minute. Then the Goldman employee got up to walk out of his boss's office. And as he approached the door, his boss said, "Oh, by the way, who did you share your, excuse me, with whom did you share your insights?" I thought, well, I didn't share with anybody. "Oh, really? Well, come back, sit back down. Can I see the check again?" Guy handed him back the check for $10,000. And his boss took the check and tore it into small pieces in front of him. He said, "Listen, your job is to be smart, but your primary job is not for you to be smart. Your primary job is to make Goldman smart. You made yourself smart, but you didn't make Goldman smart. And I hope you never forget this moment. Your job as a future leader in Goldman is to make your organization, is to make Goldman smart and not just you smart." This guy laughed. Now he's a very senior person. Says, "You know, I've never forgotten that story, and I've told that to every time I've been promoted, to every team I've been on. And the message has gotten through that if you're going to be on my team, your job is to make us all smart and just not you smart." And as a result, his performance at every step of his career has been fabulous. By the way, what tool did that supervisor use to give an incentive for people to make the information whole greater than some of the parts? Measurement and rewards. The reward system gave them the flexibility to encourage people to share. Okay. So those are, now one final example. So the last step is, how do we apply? Now, I hope you can see a theme that the HR can, if they think about what we do from an information logic framework, we can contribute to building information as an organization capability. But statistically, we saw earlier, we don't tend to do that. It's the worst thing that we do. But that has more impact on our value created for customers, for sustainable value for our markets, than anything else we can do. So the last one, let me give you one final example. I'll try to do this last one quickly. This is from Bayreuth. Bayreuth is an oil field service company that at one time controlled 24%, this is a few years ago, controlled 24% of a $20 billion market. Over a 3-year period or so, it had dropped from 24% to 19%. So 5% in drop in a $20 billion market means that they just lost $1 billion off the top line. Okay, so the new CEO, and by the way, a new CEO came in, a new CEO, Buddy Parker was his name, came in and went around to every department and said, "So what can your department do to help me to solve this problem? We're bleeding market share, we're bleeding cash. What are we going to do?" Now, you're the head of HR. What would be your response? Well, let me tell you what the response almost every HR professional I've talked to. They say, "We can help you cut your costs." Well, maybe that needs to be done, but that's not going to solve the problem. So therefore, but the head of HR made a brilliant statement. He said, "You know, before we, by the way, what should the question be? What should HR be saying?" I wish we were all here together in a classroom and we could have a great fun debate. Is what should HR's response be to, we're losing market share, we're losing money, what should HR be doing? Okay. And the answer should be, first thing we need to do, we need to go out and find out where our disconnects are between our people and the marketplace. And so some people I say, well, that means we have a meeting to discuss it. No, what we need to do is go out and talk to our customers in greater detail. And so the HR department, actually training and development, together with some young hot shots from the marketing department got together and developed a survey and a process for administering that survey that went to 1,200 customers throughout the world that represented 90% of the total buying power of the total industry. And so, and we asked these 1,200 customers to allocate 100 points across these different buying criteria. Customers could buy on the basis of price or cost, service, quality, on-time delivery, and innovative products. And we asked them to allocate 100 points. But before we gave top management the customer data, first we asked top management to guess what the answers were going to be from the customers. And the reason we want to do that is obviously top management somehow gotten disconnected from the marketplace. And so we gave, and here was top management's guess. 34% of the buying criteria from these 1,200 customers was based upon price or cost. 19% was on service, and the rest of these added up to 100%. Then we gave them the customer data. Whoops. Price or cost came out at 12%. Service came out at 48%. Now, marketing and HR had provided the process for doing this and the logic for doing it, but it was done with partnership with marketing. Now, but it becomes a very interesting comment. So, what do you think top management's response was? Oh, no, that can't be right. You guys, it says, you guys in marketing, this is what happens when you get HR involved in a real business. You know, obviously that 48% is the wrong number. You guys have screwed it up. We've gone around to all these customers and you guys can't even take an accurate average. They were angry. That number can't be right. Okay, well, we had all the surveys. Some were electronic. Most of them were paper copies because they were administered throughout the world. And finally, after about 20 minutes of their looking through the data, they finally said, oh man. By the way, the critical moment was when one of the senior leaders looked at another senior leader and said, boy, this is the response from the head of purchasing for ExxonMobil. Look, that's exactly what his number is. I can't believe it. Well, and as Yoda would say, and that's why you fail. But the point is that he couldn't believe it, because he then said, well, back when this individual, this guy from ExxonMobil and I were drilling engineers in Houma, Louisiana, 25 years ago, that's not what he's thinking. Well, you think he could have things could have changed in 25 years? Yeah, but not that much. Bad assumption. So now here's the key finding that brings us back to information management. If you believe that number, if you believe you're fundamentally in a cost game, you're in a commodity business where cost is critical, then what kind of people do you hire? You hire cheap people and what do you measure? You measure cost control. What do you reward people for? You reward people for keeping their costs under control. What kind of training you're going to give? You're not going to give any training because you don't think training matters. You don't think people matter. You think that we're in a commodity business. And that's what this company was doing. But on the other hand, if you believe that number, that 48%, now what kind of people do you hire? What are you going to measure? What are you going to reward? How much training you're going to give? And what is that training going to focus on? And once you understand that number, then you know exactly what to do in HR. And HR becomes a primary tool to execute a clear understanding of what's going on in your business. And that's what this company did. Bayreuth did. They changed their recruitment criteria, their measurement rewards, their promotion criteria, their training program just was radically transformed. And as a result, that market share that had dropped from 24 to 19% over the next 2 years, just in 2 years, went from 19% to 31% for a $2.4 billion contribution to the top line. And why this is an important story is the company didn't have any data to justify changing anything else, but they did change. but they did change their HR practices that refocused the company on a service culture instead of a cost-based culture. And that is how they tied together, how this company, with the help of HR, helped acquire the right information, make sure it's analyzed correctly, it was interpreted, debated, and shared, and then applied. And that was led by HR with partnership with marketing. Now, that's with the assumption that your external customers are really important to you. That's why I focused on that today. Because the question I was asked to talk about is, how does HR create competitive advantage once the pandemic is over? And to create value for your customers, HR can play a very powerful role in creating the flow of information as a fundamental source of competitive advantage by contributing to how your company acquires, analyzes, and applies information logic to itself. So that's and the reason we want to focus on that is that's what creates the greatest value for our most important stakeholder, and it's what we don't do very well, so it provides an area of opportunity for HR to be involved to create competitive advantage. So I'm sorry I've gone over a little bit. I've got time for maybe a few questions. But by the way, obviously you can see I love this, not because it's kind of fun and there are fun stories connected to it, because the data tell us that that's how HR creates value. And that's how you create value both for employees and for your customers, by bringing the two together. Okay, I've got time for some questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. It's wonderful. You have given such great examples. At least, some of us who are in the teaching definitely are going to use them in our regular classroom. Wonderful insights. And this is what we have been talking about, thinking about, how HR can leverage the information, and you have really given us the insights. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There is a question here in the chat box. If HR starts doing all this, as you've seen in the last example that you've given, would there be a possible conflict between the marketing and HR? And how do you resolve that?
That's a great question. I believe there's no more, it's more important for HR and marketing to collaborate than any other two departments in the company. I believe that, because the marketing folks know what's happening on the inside. We know how to translate that information into employee action, behavior, and values on the inside. So, and that doesn't happen overnight. I believe that if we had, I think HR folks have to earn their way into the credibility and legitimacy of talking to marketing. So, and that means you have to read analyst reports. You have to read the annual reports and credit reports and other reports of all of your competitors, of your customers. You need to understand fully what's going on in the industry. You need to become as expert in understanding your industry on the outside as you are in understanding your employee and organization capabilities on the inside. So there's a high price to being paid before you go talk to marketing and say, gee, I'd like to talk to you. They might ask you, so who are our 10 largest customers? What are their buying criteria? Why do they buy from us instead of our 5 major competitors? Who are our 5 major competitors? What do they do better than we do? What do we do better than they do in the response to the buying criteria of our 10 largest customers? What within our target markets, what are the discretionary spending patterns of our target customers within those markets? The question is, how are we doing so far? If I were to ask you those questions, are you going to be at 90%, at 60%, at 40%, or at 20%? Well, I've asked that to a lot of HR folks, and without any introduction more than what I've just given you, the answer is between 20 and 30%. You walk into marketing and they're going to say, why should I spend time with you? You haven't even done your basic homework on what's happening in this company. So anyway, so once you understand that, and then you go to marketing and say, we have some ideas about how we might add value to some of your initiatives. Then you're ready to talk.
Okay.
But the most important thing is to understand the logic we went through today, is for you to spend more time understanding how information functions as a competitive advantage, and then to be versant with what that information is. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, do you see any significant difference in terms of the HR trust deficit with the rest of the departments between India and, say, the US and Europe? Is it significantly different here?
That's a great question. I love that. And I should have brought the data with me. We have broken down these results I just went through with you by continent. And by the way, by the countries that gave us the most data. So we've broken it down by Europe, by China, by India, by the United States, by Australia. And I'm happy to announce that these relationships we've been talking about today in terms of HR's impact on information management that then impacts the organization is stronger in India than any other place in the world. Now, it's still not very good. I need to point that out. And it should be a lot better. But India HR folks, and I wish I could be, if we have 130, let's see, we were at 150 some odd. Now we're at 130 participants. I'd like to, if I could ask you to raise your hand, how many of you have a degree in engineering? Probably 2/3 to 3/4 of your hands would go up. The point is that within India, there is a understanding of technology and information more than any other cross section of HR professionals in the world. Now, does that mean you don't have room to improve? I have a kind of a fun, it's not very, a little bit of a funny training development story. Should have been about 10 years ago before I went to the Middle East to work for a while. I was asked to speak to all the HR, the upper salaried HR professionals at Walmart. There's in a huge auditorium, and I was lecturing about how important it is for HR folks to know the business. And then I asked the question, so how many of you think you know the business really well? And almost all the hands went up except one section. And it was clearly a group of people who were sitting together. And I said, so why do you folks are so confident you know the business? Well, because we're evolved to be a senior HR person in Walmart, you have to have worked as a store manager, assistant store manager. So I asked, how many of you have been an assistant store manager, Again, all the hands went up except for this one group of folks over here. And I kind of laughed and walked over to them, said, so who are you people? And finally, somebody from the back of the room said, they're training and development. That wasn't a good sign. And I asked, so what do you guys, well, we were training, and they started to go through their litany of off-the-shelf consulting packages that they're using for their training. And it wasn't good. So anyway, so the point is that, but that's a negative story. On the other hand, what department, learning and development, should own the information logic as much as any other department? It should be those that are involved in learning. But then to do that, I think the challenge will be we have to think in terms of learning on a broader informational logic instead of simply just what happens in the classroom.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think we'll take one last question before we formally propose a word of thanks. The question is, what is your take on AI impacting the reduction in labor budgets for human workforce, necessitating need for L&D? How is AI? Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. AI is clearly going to impact training and development radically. There's been research done before the pandemic that at Ohio State and at the University of Michigan and at Carnegie Mellon that says that when you are training skills and tactics, that online learning can be very powerful and efficient. But if you're going to bring about fundamental changes in the way that people think and behave, where you're going to change their business paradigms, change their business model, they're thinking about their business models, then that has to be done in the context of a debating and discussion context. Now, what we don't know is fascinating. Right now, you know, you've all learned to do breakout rooms in your companies with Zoom, with MS Teams and so forth. But what we also know is that, depending on what research thing you're looking at, more than well over half of communications, some of the estimates up to 90% of communication occurs through nonverbals. And when we're online, we can see each other's faces, but we can't see the body language clearly. We can't, you know, a dog comes in and bites your foot while you're trying to carry out and you scowl. Well, that may not be you're scowling at your colleague, but you're scowling at the stupid dog. So the challenge will be when COVID's over, there's going to be a necessity for us to still being able to get together and debate things intensely like the BlackRock Institute does, and really hash things out intellectually. And I think learning and development is going to have to figure out that point of trade-off between online debate, discussion, and learning, and face-to-face debate, learning, and discussing. And so I'm optimistic that that will happen, but obviously the learning and development budgets will shrink because there will be done more online. We're going through a transition right now with Tata. The University of Michigan has been working with the Tata, across all the Tata families of companies for years. And we're in the midst of working with them, answering that exact question. So invite me back in a year and I'll have a better answer for you.
Okay, well, one last, not a question. You know, there are some students and research scholars. If you have to, and for all of us, if you have to give one message as a HR leader, what would that be? Oh,
that's easy. That's easy. Your job, your most critical, if you're a student and listening, and I hope you are, your most important issue is to define what you mean by people. And there's two dimensions of people. Right now, in most of your classes, you're learning about people on the inside. If you're only learning about people on the inside without understanding how to think about the requirements of people on the outside, then you are irrelevant. Because if you create great demand in terms of your skill, capabilities, and so forth, that are not exactly aligned with both the current but also the future requirements of your customers and competitors on the outside, then you're creating supply for which there's no demand. And if you're creating supply for which there is no demand, the economic value is zero. So the first thing is you need to understand when you define people, there's two parts to what you mean by people, inside and outside. Second component of people is whether you mean people singular or plural. Now, what I mean by that is the word people, you can use people as a singular. You know, my people, my people are terrific. you can talk about them as individuals, or my people are terrific. I'm thinking about them as an organization. And my traditional metaphor is, is it possible to have 5 world-class players on a basketball team and not have a world-class basketball team? So you can have 5 world-class people as individuals and not have a world-class people as an organization. So we have to make the shift in our thinking from developing people as individuals to developing organizations. And those are fundamentally different ways of thinking. So there's 2 dimensions of people, inside and outside.